As a business-to-business marketer, your needs are unique. B2B buying cycles are long, and your customers face incredibly complex decisions. Isn't it time you had a marketing platform built specifically for you? LinkedIn ads empower marketers with solutions for you and your customers. LinkedIn ads allow you to build the right relationships, drive results, and reach your customers in a respectful environment. On LinkedIn, you'll have direct access to and build relationships with decision makers. Of the 875 million users on the network, 180 million are senior level executives, 10 million are C-level executives. You will also be able to drive results with targeting and measurement tools built specifically for B2B. And they work. Audiences exposed to brand messages on LinkedIn are 6 times more likely to convert. LinkedIn ads also ranked number 1 for security, community, and ad experience as part of Business Insider's Digital Trust Study. Here at Sway Group, LinkedIn is a pivotal part of our day-to-day and is just absolutely vital for building relationships with clients and with our employees. Make B2B marketing everything it can be and get a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome to The Art of Sway, the podcast that uncovers the power of influence and its impact on all areas of our lives. I'm your host, Danielle Wiley. Each week, we'll explore the many facets of influence through candid conversations with industry insiders, from brand marketers to social workers, educators, leaders, and more. Let's dive in. Tracy Bennett is an associate puzzle editor for the New York Times and editor-in-chief at The Incubator, a subscription-based puzzle venue. Her crossword puzzles appear as a feature called X Games in Bust magazine, and she makes puzzles for the Crosswords with Friends app. Tracy has had puzzles published by Nitty Magazine, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Universal, Simon & Schuster, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Queer Crosswords, and Women of Letters. She constructed for the 2017 Indy 500 Puzzle Tournament and donates puzzles to Ground Cover News, a local 501c3 organization taking action to end homelessness and poverty. Tracy has been in charge of editing the popular word game Wordle since November 2022. It was so great to have Tracy Bennett on. I had found out that she lives locally to me and then set about stalking her to figure out how to get her on the podcast because I am obsessed with word games. And Tracy is the editor of Wordle and also a crossword puzzle editor at the New York Times. As you'll hear, I happened to bump into her locally and invited her on, and we had a fascinating chat. If you don't know much about the crossword puzzle community, space, ecosystem, this is going to be illuminating. There's probably a lot more to it than you ever knew. So I hope everyone enjoys. Hi, I am so excited. Welcome, first of all, to the podcast. And thank you for dealing. I was like a total creep and completely out of character. I had just learned. So when I met you, the day before, I had realized that you were in Ann Arbor, like I am, and had been kind of trying to figure out how to reach out to you to invite you on the podcast because I'm a huge fan of Wordle and really all of the New York Times word games. And then I was at the grocery store doing a taste testing of alcohol-free spirits, and I saw you in your spelling bee cap. And accosted you, which I never, like, I'm very shy in public and meeting people one-on-one, but I don't know what came over me. And I accosted you and somehow didn't completely freak you out. And here you are. So welcome.
No, I was glad you did. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, great. For those who don't know, you are the editor of Wordle, which has kind of taken everyone by storm. I don't think I know anyone who doesn't play, maybe my weird brother, but other than that. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about your journey, because I know you didn't start out working in the crossword and word game space.
That's correct. That's correct. So, well, I mean, I've always been into puzzles ever since I was a child. I was voraciously solving like jigsaw puzzles when I was very little, and I always loved word games, highlights, the magazine
Yep.
highlights. I was very into that. And I always just like sought out in the newspaper the section where they have the jumble and, compare the pictures and find the differences and things like that. So always been kind of like my bag, but and like over the course of my life, I have been more of like focusing on reading and studying English literature and things like that. So I have an English literature degree from the University of Michigan.
So you got the degree and presumably you stayed in Ann Arbor.
That's correct. So I
You
came
thought it was
from,
so amazing that you
yes,
couldn't leave.
I grew up in Maine and came here for my sophomore year, transferred from the University of Southern Maine, where I was
Okay.
actually a theater major. So there was some part of me that was interested in being like an actress. I was too shy to even try out for plays. So I like my first year, my freshman year, I just took classes like Shakespeare and things like that, like the more academic ones, and was too afraid to go to any tryout. And I
Yeah.
kind of figured out that that wasn't really for me. So I switched to being an English literature major and also transferred to the University of Michigan, where my sister Cinda Hawking was already attending.
And then so then after
Yeah.
that you had a whole other career really before this whole New York Times gig.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was a student of English literature, but I was starting to figure out in my junior and senior years when I was working on a thesis. I was in the honors program in English, and I was writing more and more. I was writing papers that were about not about like literary theory or the historical context of a book that I was reading, but like how the paragraphs were working and how the sentences were working and how the word choices conveyed what the writer was trying to say. And it turns out I was also really interested in foreign languages, and I was studying Spanish really intensively as well. That my real interest was linguistics
Okay.
rather than like purely literature or theory. And so if I had gone on and like done a master's or gone on for a PhD, I would have switched to linguistics. And I was figuring that out by the time I was a senior.
Mhm.
But I also didn't want to keep being an academic. I wanted to be in the real world working, and I was really interested in publishing. But the work that I actually got right after college was secretarial. And I actually did enjoy that. Secretarial work is, there's a lot of no sorting and actually using words and helping edit
I
and
loved it.
uh,
I temped all through college and
yeah.
did like because I'm a very fast typer. I think from my years of piano and I
Yeah,
love doing that and just like having this set thing that I could organize and get done and then move. It
me
was
too.
very
Totally.
satisfying. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also worked at the hospital because I had, you know how you do work study. Well, some people do work study in college. I did work
Hmm.
study, and I got placed at a job at the hospital. And so then I was also doing like I worked at the blood gas lab overnight, their night shift, and I did some more scientific things.
Yeah.
But everything that I did, appealed to some like working with details, which I really love to do, and analyzing things and sorting things and keeping track of things. That's kind of like my vibe.
Yeah. So then, so you did that, and then what
Mhm.
you went into secretarial.
Okay, yeah, secretarial, and I did that for couple of years. And I was starting to feel like I really wanted to use more of my degree. Like I really wanted to work with words in a more intensive way,
Hmm.
like for a publisher. But I didn't know where to go in Ann Arbor for something like that. And I was in a relationship. I wasn't going to leave and like
Right, right.
move to New York City or Boston or something. So I was just at a party, and somebody at the party said, "Oh, you should." I said this to them, like in just kind of casual conversation when we were talking about work. And he said, "Oh, I work at Mathematical Reviews, and it's really fun and interesting, and they're looking for copy editors." And like I was like, "Yeah, I'll just toss in my application." And I got interviewed, and I got hired. It was quite a learning curve there because I never was very comfortable with mathematics. I did algebra, but
Yeah.
I didn't go any further than that. And this is like higher level, postgraduate level mathematics, way beyond my abilities to understand. So a part of it took me a year to do the job well, 6 months to even be competent. It really is a language, and that's how someone like me would need to approach a job like this. So I learned how to read
Yeah.
equations like sentences. It's like sometimes a variable may be a noun, sometimes an expression like A equals 2, for example, the equals is the verb, and there's like a subject and there's an object.
Fascinating.
And then you've got to deal with punctuation around that. But also, that whole expression can be a noun in a bigger sentence, larger equation, or within like words, English words.
My son is starting at Michigan next year and majoring in math and does not love reading.
Oh,
And so I feel like I'm going to force
oh,
him to
that's
listen to this
interesting.
conversation so that he can see the connection.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And math is just like it's actually quite a beautiful language, and it's what is cool about it is that like it's a language that everyone who speaks different other languages can actually understand. So like if you write an equation, anyone who speaks any language can also speak that language. It's almost like translatable and very pure. It's very pure. But I also learned there to so we had a lot of foreign languages that we had to process in the course of publishing. They were called reviewers, people who wrote the
Hmm.
reviews for mathematical reviews. They were all over the world and spoke many different languages, so the English might be a little bit choppy or unclear. And so part of our jobs was to make it clearer. So understanding what how other languages are structured really helped me to be able to determine, what they were trying to say.
Yeah.
Also, we were intaking just like titles and dealing with translations of titles. So I taught myself to read Cyrillic, and it was very similar because didn't necessarily understand the word, but I could sound it out. So phonetically, I could sound out all the Cyrillic letters, and then I could also proofread them to make sure nothing was mistranscribed, mistransliterated. That's
Right.
the word. Yeah. So I learned a lot in that job, and it really got me heavily into details, which I absolutely loved.
That's awesome. And so, how did you make the transition from that to the New York Times
Well, I was
puzzle
there
team?
for 30 years. I
Okay.
stayed at
So it was
Math
a
Reviews
slow
for 30
transition.
years.
Yeah.
I loved it. So when I started at Math Reviews, I took a cut in pay from a secretarial job because it was what I wanted to do. And
Yeah.
I think that is part of the story of my life is that I always stuck with or followed my heart and stuck with the things that I love. So like when I found something that really satisfied, I don't know, my passions, my vibe, whatever, when I found something that really, really felt good to do, it's like I knew I wasn't gonna do something else. I wasn't gonna like do work I didn't like. I was definitely gonna, even if it's paid less and I had
Yeah.
to live like a college student for the rest of my life, I was gonna
You're
do
in the
it.
right town to
Yeah.
do it.
So I did stay there for 30 years. I was there for 5 years before I became manager of the department. And that was a big change. I actually had to stop doing the work that I love every day, but I did reward myself on Fridays by copy editing most of Fridays. But there was a lot of personnel management and dealing and developing people skills. Yeah, people management
Yeah.
skills. And that I can say that I got good at it, but I never loved it. Like that was never like satisfying to my soul. One of the things that kind of came out of that is that I really enjoyed my hobbies outside of work. And one of my
Yeah.
hobbies was solving puzzles, particularly crossword puzzles. I always solved the Sunday New York Times puzzle since I was
Yeah.
17 years old. I mean, with a few breaks here and there, and especially at difficult times in my life, like at certain, like
Hmm.
during a breakup. I was with someone for 13 years, and when that was breaking up, I definitely got into puzzles big time. So I would buy a whole book and just like solve a puzzle every day. Yeah, so it's always been kind of a soothing resource for my well-being, in addition to
Yeah.
just really satisfying my my analytical and puzzling soul.
Well, it's so, I mean, I'm so convinced that it's so good
Yeah.
for you and for I mean, my grandmother solved the Sunday puzzle
Yep.
till the week she died at
Yep.
99. I mean, she couldn't walk. She was in a nursing home, but she did that
Mhm.
puzzle every single week.
That was my great aunt Kay. Um,
Yeah.
she was my grandmother's sister. I actually inherited all of her. crossword puzzle dictionaries. And of course, we don't really use those anymore because we have the web.
Yeah.
You can Google everything now. But she was like dedicated Sunday New York Times puzzle, and we had that in common. And I always felt like I kind of like soul connected to her in that way,
Yeah.
because nobody else in my family was really that way except me. Yeah.
So you loved puzzles and had always done them. And then, so you 30 years at Mathematical Review.
Right, but at the 20-year mark, I was I there was something at the Ann Arbor News where they had like a competition. It wasn't a tournament, but it was a puzzle solving competition. And I thought, I'm just going to walk down to the Ann Arbor News headquarters where they were doing the contest.
Yeah.
And it was self-directed, so you didn't have to like sit in the same room with people and solve together, but you could go and like check in, get your puzzle, and be timed, and then turn it in at the end. So I did that, and I won by a lot on time, but I had one square wrong, and the person who came in second
Okay.
was perfect. That has bothered me for the
It
last
bothered me too.
10 years, but like it still was like inspiring. I had a friend and coworker, Lisa Nichols, encouraged me to go to the American Crossword Puzzle Tournament, which I did the following, like it's the next time it was available to go to. I thought, well, first I watched Wordplay, the documentary about the American Crossword Puzzle Tournament, got really excited, and I was thinking of myself as a competitor. So I went to the ACPT, as it's called for short. At that time, it was in Brooklyn. Started out in Stamford, Connecticut, moved to Brooklyn for a while when it got really big after the Wordplay documentary came out. Is now back at Stamford, so it's kind of like had an arc. But at that time, it was in Brooklyn, so I was
Yeah.
going to the big city. I had a young child at home, Daniel, my son. So I was kind of leaving him for a few days for the first time, like getting some time on my own and like exploring a side of myself that I hadn't really explored. Am I a competitor in crossword puzzles? I did find out that I'm not that competitive. I thought I would be, but like the people who really are competitive, they don't even really read all the clues. So they only do the downs. And then they may just make sure that the crosses look like they make sense. So it's about winning. It's
Oh,
not
no kidding.
about.
And wait, this is so fascinating. It has nothing to do with influence or anything we're talking about. But why would you start with downs versus acrosses?
I
Because
believe I
it's
believe
faster?
that it's because most of the time the theme of a crossword puzzle is in the acrosses. So the
Right. I was just
theme,
thinking about that this morning, that
it would be
it's always in the
distracting.
across. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
So I I got was like in the lowest division, halfway up the lowest division. There are 6 divisions when I finished in that contest. I didn't even finish 2 puzzles in time. So I kind of quickly realized that wasn't going to be my thing. I did compete for the following 2 years, but more for fun, like not in a serious way. It's
Yeah.
just fun to be there with my tribe, which is really the most significant part. I found my people when I went to the tournament. Like within 10 minutes of being there, I was like, oh, like these are my people. And it was
That's
just like
awesome.
incredible. And in the process, I also met people who make puzzles because a lot of them go to these events, and some of them are officials, which I am now. I'm an official at the ACPT every year, and so that's more of like an overseeing, helping the whole thing go well. So
Yeah.
I found a mentor in puzzle making there, and I kind of switched gears from competing to making. And that was definitely a magical moment for me because I just got more and more involved after that. And it started to take over more and more of my life. Every year I was doing more and more of it.
Content marketing, SEO, competitive research, advertising. Sounds like a large scope of work you need to get done. How about full digital marketing control over your business? SEMrush can be your right hand for that. It has over 50 tools and reports to cover any online marketing activities. No more switching from one service to another. Get a 14-day free trial and watch your business grow. Go to bit.ly/SEMrushMPN. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/SEMrushMPN.
And it's hard. Like, I mean, I've always loved crossword puzzles, and mid-COVID, my brother-in-law and I were like, we're going to make a puzzle, because he's like way faster than I am. And I said, we're going to make a puzzle together. We're going to do a Thursday. I have an idea. And we like downloaded the software, and I took a class, like an online class with Ross Trudeau,
Oh,
because he was doing
excellent.
this free. Yeah.
All
And he's
right.
wonderful. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And the class was great. And then I sat down to try to do it, and I was like, this is too hard. It's hard to make puzzles.
Yeah. Yeah. It is definitely, I would say it took me a year to really be able to submit puzzles that would get accepted by a publication. And a lot of the first puzzles that I submitted were co-authored. I didn't feel comfortable doing my own for a while. So yeah, it was actually similar to learning at Math Reviews how to deal with math. I mean, it was a process. And there are 4 areas of learning. It's not just one thing. I mean, there's developing a theme, which actually is, I think, the hardest. Developing a tight, concise, meaningful, and funny theme is very hard. And then making the grid, placing your theme. And I don't know if you know this. You probably do because you took a class, but usually a theme is placed symmetrically within a grid, and that grids have symmetry. So the black squares are like symmetrical. So learning how to make a grid, fill a grid well, not full of junky, crappy words that nobody knows, and then writing clues.
Yep.
So it's quite a process, as you know.
So, and I want to get back to the working with a collaborator and how that whole community works, but just quickly to kind of finish up the story. So you started creating puzzles, and how did that transition to actually becoming your day job?
I got a few. So my very first puzzle was commissioned, and that was by Nitty Magazine, and that was fun. And I learned a few things in that process, because I had a grid with a typo in it, and I found it out like the day before I was about to send the files. Since learned to call that every time it happens, which isn't that often, fortunately, my Baudelaire moment, and I call it a Baudelaire moment when you make a really stupid mistake like that, because I misspelled Baudelaire.
Okay.
And that was a knitting pattern. I mean, it was part of the theme.
Yeah.
So there was that. So that was like a learning curve. I was starting to submit to the Times and other places. I got lots of rejections, which everybody does, because the Times gets 200 puzzle submissions weekly, and they can choose 7 of those. So the norm is that you don't get your puzzle chosen. But I would take those puzzles and resubmit them to other venues. And I got 2 puzzles published in the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is pretty cool, because that's like has an academic connection, and I liked it. I also got one in the LA Times, I think, before I got one in the Times. So I finally, I think with my 13th submission, my 12th or 13th submission, got one accepted. And the magic was that it was a Sunday, which was my favorite kind of puzzle. And they're very hard to make. They're twice as hard to make, really. It's really hard to come up with 7 to 9 really good theme answers. And these were artist puns. They're kind of groaners. I'm actually still surprised, because we say no to a lot of groaner pun puzzles. But it would be like with flying colors instead of with flying colors, and smoke and mirrors instead of smoke and mirrors. And the clues were pretty funny. I can't remember them at the time now, but they were funny. And it was very exciting. And really, once that happened, I felt like, this is it. I'm like, this is something I do outside of my day job, and it's something that is fulfilling to the max. It's just like exactly what I want to be doing. It's not like beside what I want to be doing, or adjacent or similar, but like it is the thing that I want to do. And as time went on, I just, so I got, after that puzzle came out, Deb Amlin, who was the editor and writer of Wordplay, the
Yeah.
not the documentary, but the New York Times specific blog about the puzzle, the daily puzzle. And she was also had the byline at Bust Magazine, which is a feminist publication. It used to be 6 times a year, now it's quarterly. And so Bust Magazine, she was working for them, making a puzzle called X
Yeah.
Files. It's a little bit sexy. It usually has like a sexy theme, but she was overloaded. She had a lot of work on her plate, and so she was looking for someone to take that byline to make that puzzle. And she wanted to give it to somebody who was new, someone who could use it as a way to get better at the craft, and also like someone who was interested in the issue of women in puzzles. So, and the issues around, like, because the Bust Magazine puzzle is definitely more progressive, feminist, and boundary pushing.
Yeah.
So I had already been making a little bit of noise in the community because it was really clear that there were very few women in the field making puzzles and a lot of men. And like, so there are various forums and blogs where people discuss these things, and I was on there discussing these things. So she was also aware that I was talking about these things. And so
Right.
I seemed like a good candidate. So she approached me and one other person, Anna Schechtman, who's also she was new at the time. She had been interning with Will Shorts, actually. She was one of the
Okay.
few female interns that he's had. I started making the bust puzzle. And that was also another opportunity for me to have regular work doing and making, creating puzzles. Because when you're just creating puzzles and submitting them on spec, it can get really discouraging because you do get a lot of rejections, even for good puzzles.
Yeah.
And so you want to have a chance to have your work be seen and commented on, or like experienced by others, get feedback, and the only way to really do that is to get it published. I decided, because they don't really have puzzle editors at Bust. They have great editors, but not like specific to puzzle editing, which is a specialized talent that you definitely can't just transfer skills from prose editing. There are a lot of like little rules for clues.
Right.
So I asked my friend and colleague, Lisa Nichols, to be my test solver, and I paid her in lattes. So,
Okay.
like, every time she tested a puzzle for me and gave me feedback, I would buy her a latte. And she was great because she's very highly literate. She's also an English major, uh, and she was, and really, really avid reader and likes games, loves like Boggle and Scrabble and everything like that. But her experience with solving puzzles, she wasn't like a veteran or like super, super into it. So she's the kind of person who I hope would be solving the bust puzzle. Someone who like wants to do a puzzle, but casually,
Got it.
and who doesn't already know crosswordese. So all those things that appear in puzzles that are kind of like glue holding the better answers together, but they're like weird words that people don't use in real life, or they're really obscure rivers and like some far off region that no one really
Yeah.
has memorized. so, so like words like étui, épée, just various things like that are considered to be
I know
crosswordies.
épée very well because of spelling
Yeah.
bee. It's always it's in
Yes.
there today.
Yeah, and even Oreo, even though it's a regular word that people use, it's so overused in
Yeah, or
puzzles that it's
Sia is the one that I'm
yeah,
sure makes my dad crazy because
yeah,
he's a puzzle solver and at 81 is
yeah.
not super familiar with Sia. So
And she definitely would spot things that I missed. So she would see like I had oter, Oater in one of my early puzzles. She's like, "What the heck is that?" And I'm like, "Well, if you'd solved puzzles every day, you would know it was a western, a western film.
yeah.
It's an old term for a western movie." Um, but so I would change that. Like I would say, like regular like solvers don't actually like encounter the word odor every day.
Right.
But she would also spot things that were like that would kind of uncover my hidden biases. Like even I, considering myself to be a feminist and progressive, would sometimes have something in there that was like a total assumption, or like something that I hadn't considered someone's point of view who was more marginalized than I. She was really good with that too, and it really helped me become sensitive to those issues in my own work, even the stuff that I was sending out to the mainstream publishers. So she was great.
Yeah.
And that really helped me develop my skills. And then Laura Bronstein, this was, now I was very experienced in doing a lot of work, and still being very vocal about the issues of women in puzzles. And Laura Bronstein, who was also pretty new to puzzle making, reached out to me, and we decided to have a Kickstarter and try to start our own publication for puzzles made by women. Not for women, for everybody, but puzzles made by women and non-binary constructors.
Yeah.
And that is called The Incubator with a K and INK.
Yep.
Get
Got
it?
it.
And we have been publishing. We're in our 5th year. This is our last year. We have recently announced that like we have a desire to get some of our lives back,
Yeah.
some of our downtime. Uh, she has younger kids at home, so for her, it's especially she wants balance, but so do I. And but we have like devotedly worked on this project for like 4 or 5 years and introduced a lot of new women to the field, published a lot of women for the first time, and non-binary constructors for the first time, and featured some work by veteran puzzle makers, women who maybe haven't had a chance to explore more progressive themes or more edgy themes or more feminist themes. So the incubator is also a place where you can have more of your authentic voice come through and not be edited in a mainstream
Right.
way. So that's nice. It's an indie, what we call an indie. So
Yeah.
there's a lot more freedom to have your personality come through in the puzzles as a puzzle
I
maker.
think it was so amazing to me, and kind of like a duh, aha thing, just the lack of diversity that had been within the puzzle making space. I mean, of course that has to have an
Hmm.
impact on what the clues are
It does.
and how it all works and who's able to
Right.
solve and who's part of the community.
Right.
And
Well, you don't, if you don't see yourself in a puzzle, I mean, and that's one of the lessons I learned even with my own like thinking I'm progressive when I'm making puzzles and having Lisa point out things that
right.
I'm not seeing. If you're not seeing yourself in the puzzle, why would you go and do another one? Like what would inspire you to continue to solve puzzles? And if especially if like they only seem to be around like the interests of a very narrow small group. So like even for the interests of the future of puzzles, the more people that can be brought into the joy and fun of solving, the more lively and the more even profitable this is
Yeah.
going to be.
Yeah, it just
So
broadens the reach of it.
yeah, I know when I started. So one of the things that kind of got me angry when I was getting a lot of rejections when I was first trying to get published, I saw Xword Info is a database
Hmm.
and a website that has a lot of statistics. They put out a lot of statistics about puzzles, the New York Times puzzle specifically.
So it's all the words that have been in there, correct?
Right,
Is
it's all
that
that, but it's also like demographic data, and you can see all of the constructors. There's a lot of different kinds of data that they compile and present, like how many Schrodinger puzzles have there been? How many puzzles with unusual symmetry have there been? They have a lot of data. And every year they would say, congratulations to the debut constructors. And the year that I was still trying to get debuted and I hadn't been debuted yet, there was an announcement. Congratulations to the 30 men and 6 women, something like that. 32 men, 6 women. I don't remember the exact number, but it was
yeah.
like that, who debuted puzzles in the Times. I'm like, wow, that's like, I think it was even less than 6. I think it was like 3, but it was somewhere under 10. And like it was just like the scale of the difference really, really struck me. And I'm like, there's something not right here. It doesn't seem like that would happen naturally. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? Like, and especially half the people who solve puzzles are women. So why are so few women making them? But it isn't the case that it was always that way. So it's not actually traditionally that it's been male dominated. When they first became a craze, puzzles, and people were competing, the first winners were women. So the first women at these competitions were women. Now they're mostly men. Um, and Margaret Farrar. Margaret, she was the first New York Times
Right.
puzzle editor, and she was there for quite a few years. And until like the 90s, the split between women and men making puzzles was more like 40-60. So
Right. Right. Right.
40%, 60%. There were a lot more women making puzzles for many years.
And then, not to get too controversial, but what how did that tank so dramatically?
I actually don't know. I think there's a combination. There's never one thing for something like this, but I do think there was more, not so much that fewer women were making it, but more men were entering the field. So I think that because the number of people making puzzles in general exploded. So it wasn't
Okay.
like, so it used to be a really niche skill with not that many people and very familiar
Right.
names making puzzles. And so it was just a much smaller community. And then when puzzle making software became available and you weren't doing it by hand on a grid,
Yeah.
like on graph paper with pencil and like doing this kind of like detailed, almost craft like work. And instead, you were pushing buttons and
Right.
filling
Right.
spaces and developing word lists and algorithms. It just became more accessible to more people to try it, to figure out how to make a puzzle without having to draw on graph paper. And so I think that was part of it.
Yeah.
There was an explosion of people entering the field, and many of those people happened to be men.
Right. Well, and there's not like something that interests me a lot is when you're in anything. So, I mean, when I'm looking at podcast guests or we're putting
Hmm.
together a PowerPoint for clients and selecting photos for it, like
Right.
you're never going to accidentally end up with diversity. It has to be
Right.
purposeful. And I think a lot of
Yes.
people kind of bristle at that because it feels, I don't know, like affirmative action and it feels artificial. But that's really the only
No,
way to
it is
make
the only way.
change.
It is. And that is another point to make is that at that time in the 90s, all of the editors of the major publications producing puzzles were men, and they were older men, men who had been in the field for a long time. Um, and that situation has changed quite a bit in the last 5 years, even. So, and that's not even bringing up the issue of race, which I mean, like it's really predominantly white um,
Yeah.
field of creating puzzles. There have been some initiatives made in various places. USA Today, for example, now has a biracial young guy at the helm, Eric Agard, who is also a phenomenal competitor at the ACPT. He's won a couple of times, and he's amazing.
I recognize his name as a constructor. Yeah.
Yeah, he's an
Yeah.
amazing human being, but he has demonstrated a lot of what's possible. His he doesn't take puzzles on spec. He has a set group of people making puzzles, so he chooses who he wants to make puzzles, and he has incredible ethnic diversity and gender diversity. And he's shown that you can do this if you make an effort.
Yeah.
Like you can make puzzles more diverse. And he's broken a few rules of puzzle construction too that the rest of us are like still afraid to do. Like he does not require symmetry,
I
which is
know that
like
that's like
huge.
it's very controversial in the cross.
Yes.
I feel like half the people listening to this are going to be like, what are you
Yeah.
guys talking
Yeah.
about? But
But
people take it very seriously.
they do. And there's a really young fellow, David Steinberg, in charge of Universal puzzles, and he's also made some strides. And then big news, Patty Verrill. is now in charge at the LA Times, the Los Angeles Times. Rich Norris was a great editor and was there for many, many years, but he recently retired, and she is only the second woman to be an editor of a major mainstream puzzle
Wow.
since Margaret Farrar. And this is amazing. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just, it felt so good. I was celebrating when she got named.
that's
Um,
awesome.
and then at the Times, Winna Liu and I were hired 2 years ago, and that totally changed the balance, the gender balance at the Times. And then we recently hired Christina Iverson, who's another talented constructor. So now we're a team that's pretty balanced that way.
Yeah. Okay. There's still change that can happen.
But Winna is the only person of color. So there's still that. But yeah, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do. And we do have a diversity fellowship now that has been instituted. We're in our second season. So we had 5 fellows last season, and all of them got published. They had debut puzzles published.
That's great. So one of the things that really interests me, just in terms of how people who have been in the space can have influence on changing this and bringing in more constructors. We talked a
Mhm.
little bit before about people partnering up,
Yeah,
and I know, and Ross Trudeau is, I've seen a lot of what he
huge.
does about
Hmm.
providing
Yeah,
like free mentorship
yeah,
to
he's
anyone
amazing.
who's a woman or of color to try to
Yep.
make a change there.
Hmm.
And I think that's so, I love seeing that. And I love seeing that like anyone who has some kind of expertise can have influence on the
Hmm.
industry as a whole by
Yes.
just putting themselves out there and offering
Yeah.
that up.
I mean, sometimes all you need to keep going, because it is a field like just like short story writing or art, where you're it's really hard to break in. And it's even when you've broken in, it's really hard to get published like in like kind of regular way because of the number of people submitting work. So even just hearing that this is normal, don't get discouraged. Like
Yeah.
even just like saying you move on and you go to the next puzzle. You send the next one in. You don't wallow, because I think a lot of people, like if they got rejected once or twice, would be like, "Oh, I'm just not good at this," you know. And I think there are some people who tend to do that more than others.
Yeah.
Have
Yeah.
the confidence to persist in the face of rejection. Sometimes you just need someone to tell you this is normal and keep going.
Yeah. You need a buddy. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a reason why,
Hmm.
I don't know, even at colleges, they give you, they connect you with older students who've been there, or
Yeah.
I mean, they do that at high schools too, or like in any field or any
Yeah.
situation, it's always helpful to have a buddy
Hmm.
who's been there
Yeah.
and done that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very
Hmm.
cool. So we did not talk about
Oh
Wordle
my
at all,
gosh.
which is okay.
I mean, we have to finish, right?
Yeah. Well, I just quickly,
Yeah.
just to kind of tie it all together, do you see, I mean, I certainly see it, like a game like Wordle, one of the things that's so beautiful to me about it is it brings people into
Oh
this
yeah.
like broader ecosystem of games,
It's
right? Like just the sheer number of people who feel like, oh, that's doable and I
yeah.
can do it. And then then you like try a mini crossword, or
Yes.
you play around with the spelling bee, or like it's like a gateway drug, right?
Right. And the whole suite of New York Times games like Spelling Bee and Mini, they're very digestible, and they're puzzles that can be played, within 10 minutes. Maybe the Spelling Bee you do it at little portions,
Not, I was
but
going to say,
yeah, the
not in
Mini,
my family. It's like cutthroat. Who's going to get
yeah.
queen bee?
But the
Like,
the Wordle is just like really, really digestible. It's much less intimidating than a crossword puzzle, but it's simple, but it isn't easy. Like you do need to use strategy um, and kind of also a little bit of luck to get the answer. So I think it's just the right
yeah.
amount of challenge and fun, that it doesn't like take your whole day, and the shareability of it. I mean, it actually became during the pandemic a way for people to touch base every day with their friends and loved ones. in a kind of fun way. The shareability without spoilers was a really kind of genius.
Yeah. It's funny. I have a spelling bee group text message with my dad and stepmom and aunt and husband and sister and brother-in-law. And then we have a Wordle one, and I had forgotten to submit my Wordle score a couple of months ago. I was like, I don't know what was going on. Work was busy, something. And my dad called me early afternoon. He's like, "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" And I was like, "I'm fine."
Because you didn't do
what the heck? And I didn't submit my Wordle score. He was terrified something was drastically wrong with me.
Yeah. I mean, there was that case of the woman who was being held hostage.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
They looked in on her because she hadn't done her Wordle. This is crazy, but it's wonderful.
It's so amazing.
Yeah.
It's very cool. So again, I could talk to you next time I see you at the grocery store. We will talk more about all this.
I'm sorry we didn't do the Wordle
Oh no, I'm actually more. I mean, I love Wordle, but I'm much more passionate about spelling bee and crossword puzzles. So this was delightful for me, and I loved it. But I wanted season 3 is dedicated to women 50 plus because I'm turning 50 this year and very
Happy
proud
birthday.
of it, and just thank you, and want to kind of celebrate. But so we have this one question that we're going to ask everyone who's on this season, which is one woman who's just really influenced you in your life, in your work, and has just had a big impact on you.
This is probably a common answer. At least I hope it is, but it's my mom. My mom, Linda Townsend. She is so she raised us in the 70s. She kind of liberated herself from being a Navy wife to being an artist. And so she was activist and artist in the 1970s. She moved around the state of Maine so that we could get an alternative, my sister and I could get an alternative school education, which the public schools in Maine are fine, but they weren't great. She wanted us to have a really good education. It was child-led and really magical. I had really good teachers, and I had a 5-to-1 student teacher ratio, which is almost unheard of, and was really, really fundamental to my development. But also she modeled what it was to follow your dream and to be true to yourself, authentic to who you are, even if it's uncomfortable and even if it causes people to not, to go against you. So, I mean, I think she's been an inspiration my whole life.
That's wonderful. That's great. Well, thank you so much. Again, this has been just a delight, and
thank you, Danielle.
I've loved having you on. Thank you for sharing everything.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please check back next Monday for a new episode featuring marketing conversations through the lens of influence. I am your host, Danielle Wiley, and this is The Art of Sway.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Kevin Hunt is one half of a great podcast called Hansen and Hunt on MPN. Kevin, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Hansen and Hunt is a place for marketers and communicators for brands, companies, and organizations of all kinds to stay on top of industry news and trends. Eric Hansen and I discuss things that make them think, things that help them do their jobs better, things that help them hopefully show up smarter with the boss. We are a monthly show, and we've been at it since 2014.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
Their preferred podcast app, of course, or head to hansenandhunt.com or follow our show at marketingpodcast.net.
You heard him, folks. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.